Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to the finale of the It reviews. Even though there's only 2 reviews, watching both of these movies back to back is a journey in and of itself, because holy shit. So today, by myself this time, I was supposed to have Shawnee Boy join me today, but he had some technical problems, so I'm just going to do this by myself. Today, I will be discussing It Chapter 2, released in 2019. And also, usually I like to keep to this theme. This shirt was made when It Chapter 2 was coming out. And the one that I wore yesterday was made when It 2017 was coming out. So, yeah, it's definitely safe to say I'm a big fan of these movies. So yeah, It Chapter 2. I don't have quite as much to say about this one that I do the first film, even though this is a much bigger movie than the last one. I'll just start off by saying Godzilla King of the Monsters was the #1 biggest movie I was looking forward to in 2019. But aside from that, yeah, I would probably say It Chapter 2 was the second biggest movie I was looking forward to. Actually, in some ways, I think I was equally as excited for this, partially because A, I'm a big fan of the first movie, but also B, I knew that was an easy date night for me and Meadow to go on, which of course we did do. Me and Meadow went out to see this opening weekend when this movie first came out in September of 2019. We made a whole date night. We watched the first movie a couple nights beforehand, and we watched a whole bunch of facts you didn't know about It videos beforehand. We were definitely in an It mood. So we went in very, very excited. And 2 hours and 55 minutes later, because we stayed behind to watch the whole credits and then stayed in there because we were just like, me and Meadow were very, 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 very happy campers when we went to see this movie. I was absolutely blown away. I was so worried for a year and a half leading up to seeing this movie. I was like, oh God, please don't suck. Please don't suck. Please don't suck. Please don't suck. Kind of like with King of the Monsters, too. I was so afraid King of the Monsters would suck. I was not disappointed there. And with It Chapter 2, I was really not disappointed with this movie. I absolutely love this film. I was so blown away by it. All of my expectations were met and then exceeded. I was a very happy Stephen King fan. And both of these movies, the Muschiettis can go to their grave knowing that he did the original book justice and he did Stephen King justice. Unfortunately, though, I'm not necessarily in the minority, but unfortunately, this movie, for some reason, just wasn't received nearly as well as the first film. It wasn't like Maleficent 2, where I can guarantee a big reason that movie underperformed was because of the 5-year wait, which it might have been because why King of the Monsters underperformed, but we had Kong Skull Island 2 years, whatever. There was 5 years between the 2 Maleficent movies, whereas here there was only a 2-year wait. Now, the first movie cost $35 million to make, and it made $701 million in its box office run. Obviously a big hit. This film, It Chapter 2, cost $79 million, and it grossed $473 million. By no means did it underperform, but just for some reason, it wasn't as successful as the first movie. And I'm confused as to why, because there wasn't a whole lot of movies that were coming out in September in 2019 at the time. So I don't know. I don't know why this movie didn't do nearly as well. I have theories. One of them is because this movie is nearly 3 hours long, which unfortunately, is one of this movie's biggest criticisms, which I do not understand in the slightest. Another one saying that it's not as scary as the first film, which is kind of true, but I think it's not as true as a lot of people make it out to be. I think this movie is as scary as the first movie, but just in a different way, and I'll explain that when I get to my scare section. And people just in general were saying it's not as good as the first movie, which I highly disagree with. Now, I will put this out there. I myself do prefer the first movie, but that's not me coming out and saying I think this is a bad movie. Obviously not. It Chapter 2 is a modern masterpiece, in my opinion. It's one of the greatest horror movies to come out in the last 20 years. It's one of the best Stephen King movies ever made. And I think it's one of the best sequels of all time. It Chapter 2 is a fucking awesome ass movie. There's elements of the first movie that do feel lacking in this film, but I feel like what new that this movie brings to the table balances that out, and which is why I do believe its Chapter 1 and 2 are equally as good for different reasons, and they're equally as awesome. So with all that being said, let us jump into the plot of It Chapter 2. In 2016, 27 years after the events of the first film, It returns to Derry, Maine, and kills a man named Adrian Mellon after he and his boyfriend are assaulted by homophobic youths, which is a very difficult scene to watch, which may or may not be as difficult to watch as the opening of the first film. The only member of the Losers Club currently in the town, Mike Hanlon, played by Isaiah Mustafa, calls the other members Bill Denbrough, played by James McAvoy, Ben Hanscom, played by Jay Ryan, Beverly Marsh, played by Jessica Chastain, Richie Tozier, played by fucking Bill Hader, yes, Eddie Kaspbrak, played by James Ransone, who played Deputy So-and-so in the two Sinister films, and Stanley Uris, played by Andy Bean. To honor the promise that they made 27 years ago to kill it if it came back. All of them travel back with hazy memories, except for Stan, embodying being a giant pussy who kills himself out of his fear of the creature. Fuck you, Stan. At a restaurant, Mike refreshes the loser's memories before it torments them with hallucinations and Stan's suicide. Richie and Eddie decide to leave until Beverly reveals that she has had psychic visions of their deaths should they fail to fulfill their promise. I wouldn't be surprised if one or more of the kids had some kind of shining ability. Mike shows Bill via drug-induced vision that the Native American ritual of Chud can stop it for good. Mike explains that the ritual requires items from their past to be sacrificed. The members' searches for these involve traumatizing encounters with it, mostly its main form of Pennywise the Dancing Clown, of course once again played by Bill Skarsgård. One of these involves Pennywise taunting Richie about his sexuality, Beverly being attacked by an old lady, and another prompts Eddie to defend himself for it to shrink and flee. Henry Bowers, whom it frees from a mental institution Henry was sent to after being arrested for murdering his father, adult Henry being played by Hang on. Wait, no, hang on. Yeah. Teach Grant, whom the only other movie that I know of, he played the sympathetic Irish guy in the bullshit WWE 2014 Leprechaun reboot. But Henry also hunts the losers under its influence. He attacks Eddie at the losers' hotel and then faces Mike at the library, but Richie kills him by driving a tomahawk into his skull. The losers rejoin Bill after asking him a question, who just failed to save a young boy named Dean from being chomped by it at the Neibolt house, talking him out of facing it alone. After saving Richie from a reference to my favorite horror movie of all time, Ben and Beverly, after saving Richie, Ben, and Beverly from it, the group descends into a cavern beneath the sewers and perform the ritual in the remains of the meteor that brought it to Earth millions of years ago. Millions of years ago. Yeah. The ritual traps the Deadlights, its true form, in a sealing jar, but it emerges from the jar as a giant red balloon, which bursts, revealing it as a spider with Pennywise's face. It pressures Mike into revealing that it killed the natives originally performing the ritual because their fears overtook them, a fact Mike had hidden. More on this later. It attacks the losers and places Bill, Ben, and Beverly in nightmarish hallucinations. Blah, I can't talk today. Which they escape once Bill releases his guilt over its murder of his younger brother Georgie, and Beverly realizes Ben was the one who wrote a love letter to her when they originally encountered it. Hang on one second. Okay. Mike stands up to the creature only to almost get eaten, but Richie manages to distract it, getting caught in its deadlights. Eddie saves him, but is fatally impaled in the stomach, and after Eddie explains how he made it feel small earlier, the losers mock it, calling it various names and insults, and causing it to literally shrink. Mike rips out its heart, which he and the losers crush, finally killing it. The losers are forced to leave Eddie, who dies from his injuries, when its cavern implodes, destroying the Neibolt house. In the book, the death of it resulted in the complete destruction of the town of Derry. The remaining losers return to their old swimming area and wash off from their confrontation with it, and join hands to comfort Richie as he mourns for Eddie. Its demise has also caused the scars on their hands to disappear, and after the losers part ways, Ben and Beverly get married. Richie returns to the kissing bridge where he had once carved his and Eddie's initials. Mike decides to move out of Derry and start a new life, and Bill begins writing his new story before receiving a call from Mike as he leaves Derry, learning that Stan sent them all posthumous letters. The letters revealed because Stan was too scared to face it, his suicide was intended to strengthen his friends against it. He asked the remaining losers to live life to the fullest potential, ending the two movies on a pretty slightly bittersweet, but mostly pretty sweet conclusion. I had a brain fart there for a sec. So, how about this plot? Well, it's fantastic. It's just as good as the first film, but for different ways. It's a great modernization of the second half of the It book. It's got a great cast that is so well, for the most part, that is so well connected to the original movie. It's got a great sense of epic scale. It's got a great budget to make it look even more epic. It just feels more like a big giant journey of a big giant conclusion to an epic journey that was literally 27 years in the making. Um, it's got a great sense of finality. It's got a great sense of scares and mystery and wonder. It's just a fantastic story and a fantastic conclusion to this overall story. And I can't give it enough praise. So with that being said, let us just jump right into the pros and cons of It Chapter 2. Pro number 1 is, once again, for the most part, unfortunately this time though, the cast and characters are really, really great. I'm not a fan of James McAvoy. I'm just going to throw that out there right now. I don't think James McAvoy is that good of an actor. I've seen Split. I've seen Glass. Was not impressed with either films. And I absolutely despise his version of Professor Xavier. He was okay in Wanted, so I'll give it that. But this has got to be hands down James McAvoy's best performance, in my opinion. At first, I was a little thrown off by him being cast as Bill, but in the context of the film, James McAvoy was a damn solid choice. They even brought back his little stutter throughout the film, too. So that even more firmly cements him as being a grown-up Bill. Isaiah Mustafa is a pretty decent grown-up Mike. Am I the only one who thinks that he looks so much like Denzel Washington? Personality-wise, he's not very reminiscent of the original Mike, but I could just chalk that up as, since he stayed behind, he grew into being a resident of Derry, and he grew out of his shy, outsiderish persona that he had as a kid. So that's good, and he still really conveys being a grown-up Mike. Who's Ben? Oh, Jay Ryan. Once again, at first, I was a little skeptical of Jay Ryan as a grown-up Ben. But once again, I watched the film, and I definitely do say that he's a very, very, very good choice for an adult Ben. He kind of has like the same eyes and forehead and the chin of young Ben, though the biggest difference is he's got facial hair. I actually think he's the only. Well, Richie has like a salt and pepper aftershave, but he's the only one of the group that have facial hair, and he has lost quite a few pounds from when he was a kid. He's now he looks like a supermodel, even though he's an architect. But yeah, Jay is really good as Ben. He keeps that lonely, kind of introverted, new kid in town look that young Ben had. Let's see. James Ransone as fucking adult Eddie Kasprak. Ah, good lord. My wife and I have a nickname for it. A nickname for this guy, Shrimpy Ass Little Turd. Because goddamn is he one shrimpy ass little turd in this movie. Especially when Richie calls him, "Let go, you little turd." Yeah, he's a shrimpy ass little turd. And perfectly, to a T, embodies being an adult version of young Eddie from the first film. And the humor of this situation is driven even further. The same actress who played Eddie's mom now plays adult Eddie's wife. And they even do this joke in the movie where when Eddie sees Mike's number and he's still talking to his wife on his car's phone, he says, "I love you, Eddie. I love you, mommy." Then it cuts to his wife. What? It's funny. It's just I feel like it wasn't intentional wink and nod meta moment from the filmmaker saying, "Yeah, we know it's the same actress. It's supposed to be funny." And it is funny. Oh god. And then of course, the ultimate casting in this movie that was pitch fucking perfect is Bill Hader as adult Richie. Fucking hysterical. Absolutely and utterly hysterical. You could not have picked a better actor to play an adult Finn Wolfhard. He's funny. He's a trash mouth talker. He's a fast talker. He never shuts up. He always quotes jokes at the worst possible moments. He's kind of a selfish, snarky, bratty, foul-mouthed little fucking adult man-child brat. And he's hilarious. He's almost the highlight of the entire movie. Just watching Bill Hader be Bill Hader in the shoes of an adult Richie Tozier. Now, I've actually never been a big fan of Bill Hader. I'm not a fan of a lot of his comedies, like Superbad, for example, which Meadow introduced me to. I kind of agree with Brendan Tenold. There's not much worse than a bad comedy, because Superbad didn't make me even crack a smile once. But damn, Bill Hader was perfectly cast as adult Richie in this film. Oh, he's so funny. Speaking of which, pro number 2 is the film's humor. This movie, okay, if there's one thing that I think this movie does better than the first movie, it's funny. It's funny as absolute fuck. There are moments, like, there's really good laugh moments in the first movie, like the rock war, whack, go blow your dad, you bullet wearing asshole moments in the first movie that are really funny. But this movie just takes it to a fucking new level. There were many moments in the theater where I was damn near howling with laughter watching this film. It is so fucking funny. Like a lot of the humor comes partially from Bill Hader, but just like the humorous banter and chemistry, especially in the Chinese restaurant scene where everybody is just fucking with each other left and right, and all the band, like when Richie first shows up, says, "Well, don't you two look great? What the fuck happened to me?" And then, "Oh yeah, I got married. Yeah, Eddie, you and your mom and I are very happy together. I just love it when she and I are sitting on the couch, and then she'll reach over and put her arm around me, and then she'll say, "Sus beer, speaking Huttese and imitating Jabba the Hutt." Oh God. Oh, and another one too from that same scene. "So you're a what now?" "I'm a risk analyst for a big engineering firm." "Was that job invented before fun?" "No, it could be fun." "Okay, explain it to me." "Okay, well, so I go into these projects and I'm just like, fuck you. Fuck you. It's funny. This movie is absolutely funny as fuck. If you want to watch this movie just for its humor, you will not be disappointed, because Christ is it funny. Yeah, I definitely do think this one is funnier than the first film. And that's the one area that this movie improves over the predecessor. A lot of it does come from Bill Hader, but James Ransone has some good funny moments too. And there's like one or two other funny moments from the rest of the cast. But it's mostly Bill and James. Pro number 3 is Pennywise. I think I don't really know. Pennywise is a lot more fun to watch in the first film, but I actually think he's a lot nastier in this film. There's some of the humorous edge from the first movie left over, but I actually think Pennywise is a lot more scary and mean and threatening in this film. He's lost a little bit of the humor and he's beefed up his sadisticness in this film. Kind of like once again Freddy Krueger, like with the first two Freddy Krueger films. There's a good mix of jokiness and scares with Freddy in the first film, but then in the second Nightmare film, it's mostly just dark, nasty, evil Freddy with that slight touch of sinister slyness to give him a little bit of a sense of humor. But for there, he's just pretty straightforward. Same case with Pennywise here, to a greater extent because there's still that playful touch. But Pennywise is a lot nastier in this movie, both in his attitude, his body language, and what he does in the film, and also in terms of the film scares, which I'll get to in just a moment. But of course, still, Bill Skarsgård does a phenomenal job. He does feel slightly different, but like I said, that's because this is a little bit of a different Pennywise from the first movie. He's meaner, he's nastier, he's more aggressive, and he's more sadistic. And looking back on it, it does make sense because he's dealing with the people, the one group of people that were able to humiliate him and fuck with him 27 years earlier. So obviously he's a pretty petty, he holds a grudge, and it's very obvious. It's very obviously so. And it's great. Bill Skarsgård still does a really phenomenal job playing Pennywise. Like I said, he's scary, he's threatening, he's kind of funny, but he's still fun to watch, of course. But he's a much more threatening horror villain in this film, in my opinion. And I'll explain that when I get to pro number. Is this 3 or 4? 4 is the scares in this movie, I think, are equally as good in a different way. There's echoes of that sense that Pennywise is watching you for your every waking moment carried over from the first film. It's not quite as strong here, but there is, because that's one big criticism that people aim at this movie. It's not as scary as the first one. I think that is partially true. Like I said, there's not quite the atmosphere of the first movie, and there's not that sense of being watched. There's still bits of that here a little bit, but it's a bit more violent in terms of its kills. There's quite a bit more jump scares. The main area that I think this film is a lot scarier is how Pennywise fucks with his victims. He's a lot more psychological. Like the type of fear that he enlists in this movie is not one so much of, hey, I'll turn into a scary monster and scare the shit out of you. It's more Pennywise poking and prodding at sensitive topics that each character, like he's poking and prodding at all the emotional baggage that all the characters are carrying around, which I'll like Beverly's history of abuse with her dad and her husband, taunting Bill with the memory of killing his brother, taunting Richie with his questionable sexuality. More on that later. Taunting Ben with the fact that he's a lonely, fatty loser who always knew he'd die alone. And fucking with Eddie with his germophobia and borderline Oedipal complex. Like how Pennywise fucks with the characters in this movie, it's far more than just turning into a monster like they were as kids. Now that they're adults, he knows of their insecurities, he knows of their emotional baggage, and he's trying his damnedest to use all of that shit as weapons against all the characters in this movie. And in some ways, that's scarier than any of the monsters or spooky, creepy shit that Pennywise does against the characters. Fucking with someone's emotional baggage can be quite damaging and damning to someone, more so than any other scary monster. So I think if you keep that in mind, and if you analyze the movie in that sense, I think this movie is equally as scary as the first movie, just in a different way. But also, of course, there are quite a few. The ultimate example is fucking with Bill when Pennywise kills the young kid Dean in the House of Mirrors. It's a lot like how Pennywise killed Georgie in the first film. Which that'll lead me into pro number 5 is the kills in this movie are pretty damn gnarly. There's quite a lot more kills in this film. The opening scene literally is a gay dude getting his damn armpit just ripped out by Pennywise after he pulls him out of a river. It's violent, it's gory, it's bloody, and it's shocking as fuck. Then of course there's Dean getting chomped, which how that's done. They're in a house of mirrors, and Dean is trapped with Bill on one side of a mirror and Pennywise on another side of a mirror. Pennywise just keeps smacking his head against a mirror, and then when it's like on the verge of shattering, he stops, gives a wide, devilish, toothy grin, then smashes his head through the window and chomps down on this kid. And there's just, you don't see the kid get bitten, but you just see this giant geyser of blood that splatters all over the window. And you're just like, and then another kill in this movie that I really like is when this little girl, name's Vicky, I think, she gets killed by Pennywise. She has like a birthmark on her face. And Pennywise says, "Oh, I can fix that. I can blow it away on the count of 3." It is kind of telegraphed what Pennywise does, but it's telegraphed in a good way. You know what's going to happen, but you don't know when it's going to happen. He's like, 1, 2. You're supposed to ah! And I'll admit, the first time that I saw the movie in theaters, I damn near jumped out of my seat. I was like, fuck. All the monsters and spooky shit that Pennywise does in this movie too is also really freaky. Which, so yeah, I like the skills. I like the kills. I like the scares. A lot more gnarly and bloody and nasty. And this will lead me into pro number. I lost track again. 6. The special effects in this movie are phenomenal. With the exception of one aspect of it, but I'll talk about that later. But overall, this has a lot to do with the fact that this movie obviously has a bigger budget. So Andy Muschietti was allowed to show a lot more and do a lot more with the creature stuff. And they do a really fucking great job with the special effects in this movie. Yeah, a lot of it's CGI. Pretty sure all the monsters are CGI, but I think there's quite a bit of practical stuff. Like the sets are practical and they look really great. But all the CGI here looks really, really, really solid. Pennywise is obviously CGI when he's in his spider form at the end of the movie. But like I said with the first film, the CGI-ness makes him look otherworldly. And because he's a cartoon joking shapeshifter, that adds to the feeling of him being otherworldly. So I think it works just fine. All the CGI work looks really good. It's well animated. It's well done. It's well crafted. It's well detailed. With again the exception of one thing, all the special effects look really good. The animated Paul Bunyan statue looks really good. The evil big floppy tit witch looks effectively freaky. All the blood looks great. Poor Jessica Chastain. When she's in that bathroom that's just flooding with blood, she had to deal with that room for 2 fucking weeks. Props to her for fighting through all that. Because, God, that looked like a pain in the ass to shoot. Um, so overall, yeah, all the special effects are really good. The practical stuff looks great. The sets look great. The CGI work is really good. $79 million budget was used very, very, very well for this movie, in my opinion. Pro number 7 is this movie is just epic as fuck. Oh, and I also say another pro is the great gore. I already talked about that, but yeah, when Dean gets chomped, there's a giant splatter of blood. That room that Beverly is just dealing with the blood flood looks really good because all that blood is real. When Adrian gets chomped, it's just nasty and gnarly and bloody as fuck. The gore in this movie is definitely cranked up a lot more from the first film. But yeah, so this is pro number 8. Pro number 8 is this movie is just epic. It feels epic, it feels big. It feels like a whole lot more stuff is added into this to make the story and scope and scale that much bigger from the first film. Not to say that the first movie was bad by any means, but this just feels more than just the guys are coming back to finish it off. This feels like a whole nother adventure in and of itself. And it feels like a different coming of age story in and of itself, too, which is great. So, yeah, this movie just, it goes to show that horror movies can also be epic films instead of just 90 or 80-minute short pieces of shit. So, what if this movie is 2 hours and 50 minutes? Speaking of which, pro number 9 is the runtime. I don't give a flying fuck that this movie is 2 hours and 50 minutes long. Anybody who complains about that, go sit in your angry masturbation corner, shut the fuck up, and die. Just seriously, go away. Nobody wants to hear your shitty opinions. Nobody wants to hear you say, oh, but it's so long. Who the fuck cares? This is literally Stephen King's second biggest book. You cannot cram that into a 2-hour movie and have it work. You can't even cram it into a 3-hour miniseries in order for it to work. It has to be this format or nothing else. Sorry. I don't mind the runtime. I think it's perfectly fine. Do I think that it makes this movie not quite as watchable as rewatchable as the first movie? Yes, because it's still like a little tough, especially with uh, life nowadays, especially with me being a dad. It's a little more difficult to sit down for a near 3-hour long movie. Whereas the first movie, it's just over 2 hours. That's a lot easier to sit through. But still, I don't mind the runtime. I think it's a massive improvement over its predecessor. And when it was announced that it would be 2 hours and 50 minutes, both me and Meadow were just like, fuck yes. So yeah, love it. And the final pro that I have is once again the music score by Benjamin Wallfisch, returning from the first film and giving us an equally as good, if not slightly better, music score. It in terms of like the recognizable like returning music traits from the first movie, it's perfect. Slightly tweaked because this is a different movie and it's also a different time period, but it's still just fine. But all of the epic music that is implemented into this movie is just awesome. Like when the best example is when the deadlights are floating down from the ceiling of the cave and they're going into this jar for the ritual of Chud. It's fucking awesome. It sucks you into it. And it's at this moment where if you're not down for this movie, the music that's played during this will definitely get you sucked into it. It's awesome. It's perfect. It's fantastic. Some of the greatest horror movie music to be scored in the last 10 years. The music in this movie is absolutely awesome. So with all that being said, do I have any cons? One con, and I have 3 nitpicks. So we'll talk about the nitpicks first. Nitpick number one is, why is Richie gay? It's never said aloud if Richie is gay or not, but there's a lot of scenes in this movie that really like scream Richie being gay. Now, that's not me saying that I'm not homophobic or anything. I don't care. I love gay guys. They're some of the funniest dudes around. If I was to see, like, if I was to come across the opening of this movie, I would just grab a bat or a knife and start swinging at the dudes beating up the gay guys. Like that scene's very hard for me to watch. Um, I have gay friends. My brother is pansexual, so I really don't care if someone's gay. My issue, though, why Richie specifically? Why is he the gay one? Why not make Eddie the gay one? Which that wouldn't be surprising in the slightest because of his mommy issues. But I actually think the best candidate of the Losers Club for being gay is Stanley. Mostly because there's a scene that shows because in the first movie it's established that Stanley is Jewish. And he's obviously struggling with that. And in this movie, there's a scene that shows Stanley making his announcement at his bar mitzvah, saying, I'm supposed to become a man, but I don't feel any different. I don't want to change. I know I'm a loser, and I always will be, and I don't give a fuck. Then he storms out of the church, leaving his dad embarrassed and ashamed because his dad is the rabbi. I think Stanley being gay, A, would have made the most sense, but also B, it would have been nice thematically because you could just say that was like Stanley's last fuck you to his dad. Because, you know, a lot of all religions are anti-gay. So it would have been a nice, like, big moment of protest against his father. Like, hey, I'm gay. If you don't like it, I don't give a fuck. Because you never really loved me in the first place. You just want me to be the son that you want me to be. You don't want me to be the person that I want to be. Which I'm sure is relatable to a lot of gay people out there. But no, why is Richie the gay one? He's a total ladies' man in the first film. And then when it comes along saying Richie is the gay one, it just doesn't quite gel. I actually theorize it may have been a studio thing, saying, you know what, the kids are diverse. There's a woman, there's a black one, and there's 5 white guys. One of them's got to be gay. Make Richie gay. Wait, what? Why? Because he's the funny one. Make him the gay one. Okay, that doesn't make sense, but okay. It's not a huge problem, and it's only a nitpick, really, if I let it be a nitpick. But just now, especially since I watched the first film and the second movie back to back, it just doesn't quite gel. Again, it's not a bad thing. I'm not trying to come off as being homophobic. I don't care if someone's gay, but in the context of Richie in this movie, it just doesn't quite work, in my opinion. Nitpick number 2, Mike is kind of a douchebag in this movie. He's emotionally manipulating everybody into coming back and doing something that they don't want to do. And he lies to these people twice in this movie. Specifically at the very end, saying, yeah, the Shokapiwa didn't survive their encounter with it. So I'm just going to scratch out the drawing that shows that and just lie to people saying, yeah, they survived. Nope, no, they didn't. So what? This is possibly a lost cause. They didn't believe, so we will. Mike just kind of comes off as a little bit of a douchebag in this movie for kind of manipulating and lying to the entire group, almost the entire movie. And he also forcibly date rapes Bill. Sure, it gets him to see the truth, and it gets him to be a believer, but it just could have been done a little bit differently, in my opinion. Because Mike, as it currently stands, he comes off as being a little unlikable. My last nitpick, this is the one special effect that I don't like, is the CG de-aging. Now, a few of the kids obviously were 2 years older in this movie, and they looked 2 years older. They looked 2 years different. It kind of shows because Eddie, Ben, and especially Richie had to be CG de-aged in this movie, and it shows, especially when they're in sunlight, like the scene where they're in Ben's hideout basement when they're all wearing shower caps. That's the scene that definitely showcases they all had to be CGI'd. There's some scenes, especially with Richie, where they just shot Finn Wolfhard straight on and he looked just fine. But there's a few other scenes where you can definitely tell that they're CG de-aged. Their skin looks too clean. It looks too perfect and artificially sculptured. It just sticks out a little bit like a sore thumb. Thankfully, they don't really focus on it too much, but when it is on screen and you're especially if you're looking for it, because I actually didn't even notice that Eddie and Ben were pointed out to be were de-aged until James from fucking Dead Meat pointed it out. I could see it on Finn right off the bat because he's probably the most poorly done, but yeah, the CG de-aging, it's a little distracting and it sticks out a little bit like a sore thumb. I see what the filmmakers were going for and they were trying not to do it, but it's just kind of a mixed thing. It's only an issue if you let it bug you. And again, thankfully, it's not on screen for very long. So if you just kind of ignore it, you can get through it just fine. But my one con with this film is Jessica Chastain as Beverly. Notice I didn't talk about her when I was discussing the cast and the pros because I've never cared for Jessica Chastain as Beverly. I think she's easily the weakest cast member of the Adult Losers Club. She just looks bored. The entire movie, Beverly doesn't feel like Beverly. Beverly at the end of the first movie feels like she had overcome a lot of her fears with her dad and was starting to grow into a stronger, independent woman. Adult Beverly. Now, I get what they were going for because this is also done in the book. Unfortunately, with a lot of victims of sexual or mental or physical abuse, they tend to do what's called re-victimization, where they put themselves either knowingly or subconsciously into a situation similar or worse than what they were dealing with beforehand. This example being she grew up with an abusive father, so then she marries an abusive man. I see what they're doing, and it is realistically portrayed. But the problem, though, is just in Jessica's performance. She always has this flat, blank expression on her face through a good chunk of the film, and it just makes her look bored and disinterested. And I don't know if she was or if she was just badly directed to look like that, but it always stuck out like a sore thumb to me. And the adult Beverly just doesn't feel like the Sophia Lillis version of Beverly, for me at least. That's really my biggest issue with this movie, and it's not a gigantic problem. I can still watch the movie and love it, enjoy it just the same. But every time I watch this movie, I always feel like Jessica Chastain could have been better. So with all that being said, my final thoughts on It Chapter 2. This is an amazing film. I don't give a fuck what anybody says. It Chapter 2 is a modern masterpiece. It's one of the best horror movies to come out in the last 10 years. It's one of the greatest sequels ever made in all the history of cinema. And it's once again one of the greatest Stephen King movies ever made. Speaking of Stephen King, I just want to talk about this real quick. I do like that Stephen King has a cameo in this film as a pawn shop dealer. And Ben's character is a writer, and he is pretty much like a Stephen King stand-in, because there's a few jokes in this movie that say, "Hey, I read your book and I loved it. Hated the ending." And one of his books is actually being made into a movie by Warner Brothers in this film. And the director of the movie is like, "I'm on your side. I want your book to be made to be good, but we got to change the ending." "I thought you liked my ending." "That was a lie. Your ending sucked." That is a big giant in joke towards Stephen King. Stephen King, which I agree with. Stephen King can write really good books, but he doesn't really write good endings. In fact, Stephen King's character, it has one of Bill's books in this film, and Bill's like, "Hey, want me to sign it for you?" He's like, "Nah, I didn't like the ending." That's a really nice in joke, and I get the sense they were doing it purely just as a joke, but it's like a playful, like, your endings aren't that great, right? Yeah, I know. That's what everybody tells me. It's like a playful little wink, wink, nudge, nudge moment. It's not like a malicious, "Hey, your shit sucks." It's not mean spirited. It's fun and lighthearted. So I appreciate that. But yeah, this movie is a masterpiece. I will once again be giving this movie a perfect solid 10 out of 10. It's one of my favorite horror movies, one of my favorite Stephen King movies, and one of my favorite films overall. It is the lesser of the two films, in my opinion, though. That's purely just on, if I want to throw on a Stephen King movie, I'll just throw on the first film because it's just a lot easier to watch. This movie, you kind of have to be in a certain mood to watch it, especially watching the films back to back. You just have to be in a little bit of a certain mood for this one, but it's still a masterpiece of modern cinema. So with all that being said, post your comments down below and let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm feeling kind of tired, so I think I'll go get some sleep. And I'll see you guys in the next video.